Ed Tate, welcome to the show. Welcome to Become Your Own Superhero.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I'm glad to be a part of your show.
The 2000 Toastmasters World Champion of Public Speaking. It's an absolute thrill and honor to have you on the podcast today. I'm going to start with a question.
Sure.
What's the single greatest benefit of being a really competent public speaker?
Well, it's not all the money. Probably confidence. That's probably the one I would say is the number one benefit of being a really good public speaker. And not only just in public speaking, but your business life, your personal life, etc. I am an introvert, which surprises a great deal, many people. And as a kid in grade school and high school, terribly shy, if you will. And public speaking actually improved my confidence in all aspects of my life. So one of the things I highly recommend for people who want help in the area of confidence is be part of Toastmasters. Toastmasters is a nonprofit organization worldwide. Go to toastmasters.org. There is a club, or in every city in the world. There's like 148,000 locations around the globe. And they teach people confidence in two different areas. Number one, leadership development, and number two, public speaking. And you get a chance to practice both of these skills live in a safe environment. So the biggest benefit of being a world champion of public speaking, or public speaker in general, is it improves your confidence. And it gives you confidence to ask for a date, ask for a raise, ask for the job. It gives you the confidence to ask.
Well, that's a really great response, Ed. And it's so simple, isn't it? One of the single greatest learnings that I've developed from my own interest in becoming a speaker and learning how to be a better communicator and just understanding how it works really is all of those things that you're talking about. And people often say to me, yeah, but Laban, I don't want to be a professional speaker. Mm-hmm. And my argument is that it's nothing to do with that at all. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with you. I agree completely, but there are aspects of your life that you do want help with. You do want to, like I said before, okay, so I'll tell you the story of what I call the legend of Pretty Ricky. The legend of Pretty Ricky, when I went to high school, again, painfully shy. However, I was fortunate. I had a coach, and it was my incredibly handsome cousin, Ricky. And we used to call him Pretty Ricky. Now, let me tell you how Pretty Ricky was. We used to go to parties. And again, I grew up in Chicago. And no matter what part of the city we went to a party to, it didn't matter if it was the north side, the west side, or the south side, unsolicited, girls would walk up to Ricky every single weekend and hand him their phone numbers. It was a bad weekend if he didn't get 10 numbers. I am not making this up. So one day in school, it's time for the senior prom. And Ricky looks at me. He says, hey, Ed, when are you going to ask Lolita out? So he knew I had a big time crush on a girl by the name of Lolita Barnes. And I said, man, she'd never go out with a guy like me. We had 490 seniors. She was ranked number 5 academically. She was a cheerleader, and she had just been named prom queen. And I said to myself, I don't have a shot. So Ricky, and to this day, I'll never forget this conversation. And it was a turning point of my life. He said, let me ask you a couple questions. Question number 1, is she going out with you now? I said, no. If you ask her and she says no, will she be going out with you in the future? I said, no. So he says, let me get this straight. She's not going out with you now. You ask her, she says, no, she won't be going out with you in the future, right? I said, right. He says, so your circumstances haven't changed. Am I right? I said, right. He says, Eddie, if you ask her and she says yes, then everything changes. He said, don't you say no before they say no. Never tap out. Never take yourself out of the game. Always ask. And guess who took Lolita Barnes out to the prom?
Hell
Pretty Ricky.
Yeah.
Pretty Ricky. I told you he was pretty, right? Well, you're not paying attention. No, I'm only kidding. She said yes. And that was a turning point in my life. And I never forgot that. And I said to myself, you know what? How many times do you take yourself out of the game? How many times do you want to ask someone for fill in the blank, whatever it may be, and you take yourself out of the game? You say no before they say no. You tap out. You say, oh, they'll never do that, etc. And that's not true at all. It's all in your head. So the biggest benefit of you being more confident as a public speaker is you become more confident as a person. And you don't have to be a professional speaker, but that confidence will help you in all aspects of your life. It can't be contained. That's the thing I've discovered. If you're confident in one area of your life, it spreads to all the other areas of your life.
Would you agree, Ed, that being a much more confident speaker than, say, the status quo is a really key component in developing charisma?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm going to answer it a different way. There is no one way to be a professional speaker. There's no one way. There's all different types of personalities. There's all different types of, all different types of people, all different types of voices, if you will. The most important thing is that you need to step up and have your voice be heard. I have a certain style. I have a certain personality. I'm known as the speaker who energizes, educates, and entertains. I get audiences involved. I get them standing up and doing all types of crazy things. And the reason I do that, not because I want to necessarily make it fun, there's actually science behind it. So for example, to the degree that you can get an audience to move with your content, it makes it memorable. Movement makes your content memorable. But that's my style. That's my approach. Your style and your approach is that we were talking, just before we started broadcasting. And you were saying, like, I like to be like a little controversial. I like to be like a little confrontational, but that's your style and that fits you. So I think in terms of charisma, your charisma is your own, it's unique. And here's the good news. You don't have to copy anybody else. The only thing you got to do nowadays is to be yourself. That's the best piece of advice I got for anybody. Be yourself, be your own voice. Don't try to copy anybody else.
What do they say, Ed? Be yourself because everyone else is taken.
Exactly. And there has never been anybody like you on earth, and there never will be. And that is your advantage. And there's room for all these different voices.
One of the things that struck me about your award-winning speech, Ed, was the sheer impact of the start. And I think I'll leave it to you maybe to share with our audience what that involved, if you're happy to. And what we'll do is we'll include the link to the original recording, certainly in the links below, because it's a must watch. I mean, it's the best goddamn speech in the year 2000 out of, tens of thousands, 35,000 contestants, I think, Ed, give or take.
Yeah. So I think what you're referring to is my start. So typically, if someone's introduced to speak, what happens for a speech, they usually start yapping right away. I don't do that. What I do mentally is I came out onto the stage. I found my spot. And then what I wanted to do is I wanted to energetically connect with the audience. So what I did is I looked to my left and I just scanned the audience. And then I looked to my right and I just scanned. And I want to greet the audience with my eyes. And then I scanned in the center. And what I'm doing is I want to greet the audience with my eyes, mentally, psychologically, emotionally. But I don't want to start until I'm ready. So even though this entire time it takes like 4 or 5 seconds or so, it sets me apart right away. Because all of a sudden it builds up the anticipation, it builds up the curiosity, and all of a sudden people psychologically say to themselves, okay, this guy is different. What's happening here? And then we start. And then in my mind, I'm thinking like, okay, we're about to go on the roller coaster ride. Now, mentally in my head, as I'm stepping out there, I'm saying to myself, there's someone who's suffering in silence in the audience who needs to hear this message. Ed, don't get in the way. And what I mean by that is don't let my ego get in the way of the message, because the message is even more important than me. So I think that's what you're referencing.
Yeah, it's the pause feels like an eternity. And what I found is the exact result of what you were trying to achieve. I was like highly, highly anticipatory of what you were about to say. And then it's like, pow. and we're not going to spoil it for the folks at home, because it's really worthwhile watching. So if you're just listening to this, just jump on YouTube, Ed Tate, Toastmasters. It's one of the main videos here. You can't go wrong. Because your childhood, your background, for those that are only able to listen to this, what's your cultural background, Ed?
Let's see. I am, I'm African American, born and raised in Chicago. I'm a bit of a mutt. My dad is African American. My mom is she's mixed, black, white, Native American. I tell people it was a wild party, and I'm pretty sure alcohol was involved. But if you look at my ancestry DNA, like you do one of those DNA tests, I mean, literally, I am like all over the globe. I think the only place that I don't have any ancestry is Australia, to the relief of probably many of people listening, and let's see, China, if you will. But like, I have family all over the place. It's absolutely remarkable, and about a third is British, Scottish, if you will. So that's kind of interesting. But being raised when I was, it was very, very challenging. So I grew up in the late 1960s, early 1970s. And because I did not look like your typical African American, and plus I didn't look like your typical white kid, I wasn't black enough to be black, and I wasn't white enough to be white. You usually got bullied by both sides. And that was pretty rough growing up, if you will. And on top of that, I'm a stutterer. So there's no cure for stuttering. So you look kind of weird and you sound kind of weird, that's going to make you a target. And one of the things I did as a kid was, my dad was in the military, so we often moved every year and a half or so. So we're going to move to this, the big city again, because we had moved away from Chicago, and we're coming back, but I'm just going to be in a different neighborhood this time. And I was determined that in this new neighborhood, the kids would not make fun of me, at least not for stuttering. So the thing I used to do every day before school and after school is I would take out magazines and newspapers, and I would read them out loud. Then in the neighborhood where I lived at the time before the move, kids used to play basketball outdoors. So I got the bright idea, let me do play-by-play. So I walked up to all the kids, hey, who's your favorite basketball players? I memorized who the favorite basketball players were. And I literally did live play-by-play as they played full court basketball outdoors, did that for several months. And then when I went to the new school, none of the kids ever figured out that I stuttered. Then from there, I went to a school called South Shore High School, and it was one of the few schools at the time that actually had a television studio. So I became a news anchor for the next 4 years. I go to the University of Illinois. I get a job as a disc jockey, not a student-run radio station, an actual real radio station. This is how I financed my college university education. And I was the #1 disc jockey for 4.5 years there. So looking back on things, if connecting the dots, the reason I became a public speaker in the first place is because I didn't want kids making fun of me. That was my start. But when I look back on it, reading those newspapers, doing that play-by-play, becoming a news anchor, becoming a disc jockey, all those things helped me eventually when I competed in the World Championship of Public Speaking. So what is it? Steve Jobs says, you can't connect the dots looking forward, but you can always connect the dots looking backwards. And those are my dots.
Was the stuttering something from birth, do you think, or was it linked to a particularly eventful moment in life, trauma, etc.?
It's something that I've always had. I can't link it to a trauma specifically. I think it's just, severe shyness, if you will, being around others. And again, looking different. I didn't look like, even in my family photos, like I was raised by my dad's side of the family. So my dad, they're Black people. And so if you see a family photo, oh, there's Ed. Oh, Ed's, yeah, there's Ed. So it's really easy to pick me out. And then when when you go to school, or you go to, you're always like that odd, people can't figure out who the heck you are. So I think maybe it could be being different, that type of trauma contributed to it. And I don't have a severe case, but I will occasionally double stammer, and I'll double clutch, and I'll repeat a phrase over and over again. And I've worked years and years and years. We're talking about decades of work that the majority of people can't tell that I have this condition, but there's no cure for it.
I mean, you've done phenomenally well. And the reason I bring it up is my older brother developed a stutter from a young age. Simultaneously, I think, became a bedwetter. And his was the result of going through divorce, the son of divorce twice in only about a decade. And I've also been through divorce twice with another step parent, but I was a lot older when the second one happened. So one's enough. And I know the impact can affect children
absolutely
tremendously. And the effect on confidence, self-confidence is rather remarkable. So for you to turn that around and end up where you are now is rather extraordinary, and very inspirational. And I love that story of when you were working on the radio doing the graveyard shift when you were at college. And I wondered if you'd share that with our audience.
Okay, so 2 stories. I initially started off on the graveyard shift of the radio station. So midnight to like 3 o'clock in the morning, which was like absolutely brutal. But my radio station all of a sudden started picking up ratings. And to the point where the station manager said, hey, we'd like you to be our drive time jock. So drive time was from, 4 p.m. until 7 p.m. So it was like one of the biggest time slots. And there was another guy who had been at the radio station for a number of years. And basically I beat him out. So, he got kicked to another time slot, not very happy about it. And he also turned out to be a football player on the University of Illinois football team. Here was a man who was a mountain of a man. I think he was 6'4", possibly 6'5", 300 pounds, and it was all muscle. There was not a slither of fat on this guy. I swear to God, his arms were bigger than my thighs. He looked like freaking Hercules. So after this was announced, he kind of corners me like as I'm leaving the radio station after my first week on the air. And he tells me, he's like, hey, you better quit, or basically I'm gonna beat the crap out of you. And at the time I'm 120 pounds, man. I'm 5'11". I'm just like a string bean, there's no way I'm gonna, I don't even, 4 of my friends, I don't think we could kick his butt, if we got together, And I'm thinking, this guy he's trying to get me to quit. And I mean, I got to tell you, I was scared to death. And he said, okay, I'm gonna give you a week to decide. And no, actually it was a Friday. I'm gonna give you until Monday to decide, and otherwise, I'm gonna kick your butt. And there was nobody there, got no witnesses, nothing. So that night I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. I told my friends, I told my family. And then all of a sudden I had this eureka moment. I had time to think. And by the way, all problems are solvable if you take the time to think. And the eureka moment was this. Even though we worked at a commercial radio station, we were both students at the University of Illinois. I happened to be a resident advisor. A resident advisor is university staff. Striking someone who is university staff is immediate grounds for dismissal from the school. Number 1. Number 2, I called the police and told them what happened. They said, well, there's nothing we can do unless there's an actual assault. I'm thinking hey, have you heard of crime prevention? I'm trying to keep your numbers lower here. Can we prevent this crime from happening? He says, no. He says, but if he does hit you, we'll arrest him. This is thanks. Okay. So then I contact my family, and we have several people who are attorneys, and they said okay, this guy, we've done some research. He might make it to the NFL. He might make it professional. We'll sue him. We'll take everything. So anyway, it is Sunday, it is Sunday, and he corners me again. And I say to him, I says, okay, here's the deal. I decided I'm not going to give up my spot, because the more I thought about it, if I gave it up, I would regret that for the rest of my life. And I said, you know what? I'd rather take an ass kicking, And I said, I'm not going to quit. I said, and before you hit me, and by the way, here's this mountain of a man, and he's got this big piece of wood in his hand. He's got a 2x4. I'm thinking dude, I didn't know we could bring wood to this. I didn't get the email. I didn't get the text message. We can bring wood. And I said, number 1, I'm not going to quit, but there's a couple things you need to know. You and I both go to University of Illinois, right? Right. You're a football player, right? Right. I says, I'm a resident advisor. And what that means, I'm university staff. And if you hit me, that's immediate grounds from dismissal from the school. You can say goodbye to your scholarship, and you can also say goodbye to the team. That's number one. Number two, if you hit me, you're going to jail because I will report you to the police. By the way, I understand that you're married and you got a baby. So you can say goodbye to your wife and your newborn daughter. Number three, I will sue you. Love your Camaro. It's a beautiful car. I think I will look good in that one. Plus, if you make it to the NFL, I'm going to get your signing bonus. Okay. So you can decide what you're going to do. Now, I got to tell you, I was nervous as hell. My hands were shaking, so I kept my hands in back of me. And I'm thinking like, this guy's going to wind up and just light me up. And you could see like the wheels in his head turning, and he just walked away. And that was the last time I dealt with him. And the aha for me was this: every problem is solvable, but we must take the time to think. And at the time, I didn't think I had anything. I didn't think I had any assets. I didn't think I had any type of help. But by thinking through this problem, every problem has a solution. Every problem has a solution. When I thought about it, I've got a lot of assets. I've got a lot of things on my side. There's a lot of things I can do, and I don't have to physically do anything with my hands. So that was a life lesson for me.
I love that story, Ed. And I'm so interested to know what's happening in that gentleman's life as we speak. Have you done any internet stalking on him?
He never made it to the NFL. He tried out for a couple teams, but never made it. And which is surprising because here in the United States, we have this football player. His name is Gronkowski. He used to play for the New England Patriots, and now he's playing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And he's a very, very popular football player. This guy was a prototype of Gronk. He was the same size, same position, etc. And I don't know, maybe he was ahead of his time, but anyway, but I know he never made it to the NFL, and he never bothered me again. That was my only concern.
Well, one thing that's really become apparent, Ed, when I have had an opportunity to interview elite level or world-class athletes, I've had Olympians and Ironman world champions and the former head coach of the New Zealand All Blacks, which win the Halberg Award, Justin Langer, the Australian cricket coach, and a number of players as well.
Hey, I've got some All Blacks gear. I should have worn it on this call.
Have you? Yeah. Like everyone loves the All Blacks, right?
Yeah.
But one thing that's become abundantly clear, all of these people that I interview that are world-class, the ones that have really, truly succeeded and been best of the best, they're all inherently really amazing people. They understand and appreciate the value of how grateful they are and how humble they need to be to stay grounded and not have ego. And it just sounds like this guy was, had an inflated ego, and that's, look what's happened. He never made it, when he had all the physical gifts that you could possibly want to succeed in life.
Well, I've seen a lot of athletes, especially here in the States. They're the best of the best in grade school, high school, and especially at university. They're treated like, they're put on this type of pedestal. And here's a big, intimidating man. So I don't think he was accustomed to someone telling him no, prior to that. And again, I had a well-reasoned, and by the way, I was going to execute on everything. The only thing I didn't want to execute on was getting my ass beat. Let's be real here. Just like, man, but I just thought it through, and again, it made a difference. And again, confidence. That situation right there gave me more confidence moving forward in my life. So I've had other situations, not nearly as physically threatening, but working in corporate America, office politics, if you will. I learned, it taught me how to stand my ground in a way that's professional, not demeaning to the other person, but to the point where, people knew that you meant business. The one thing I did learn about my upbringing in Chicago is if you let a bully beat you up, then that's going to be your reputation. And then other bullies, aspiring bullies, will practice on you. Okay. That's a rule. It's like, okay, like, okay, here's a guy you can beat up, and and that's a life lesson as well. But if you stand up regardless, and people say, hey, that's a guy who's going to stand up, you know what? There's easier prey, if you will. And that's the lesson I've learned. So I've always stood up, no matter what. And that's something that has a confidence that has built about me, if you will.
You said something just before, Ed, that I think is really important to highlight, and that you were going to follow through with everything that you'd threatened. And I think if you go into an altercation or an engagement like that and you aren't willing to commit to what you are threatening, that will come through and it'll come across as weakness. So I think, that terrified him, you told him a story of what his potential future was going to look like. I think that's
exactly
the most powerful thing. Yeah.
I never thought of it that way. Yeah, but yeah, this is what your future life is going to look like. Yeah.
The power of storytelling.
Yeah.
Speaking of storytelling, Ed, you've been involved with a number of books. I think, is it 4 or 5 that you've written?
I've been in what you call anthologies, if you will. So I've written a chapter here, chapter there, and things of that nature. I am working on the book right now, which it's my first solo book, or as my wife says, your first real book.
Brutal.
Family has no filter. Yeah. No. Have you ever had that experience? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Mr. World champion of public speaking, empty the garbage. We've got a 2-year-old, change the diaper, kind of knock you down there, if you will. But it's how to win high stakes presentations. And then what do I mean by a high stakes presentations? And we're not talking investment banking and things of that nature. A high stakes presentation could be a job interview. A high stakes presentation could be a date. For the most part, I'm working with small businesses, and they're making some type of pitch, and they're trying to sell their products and services. And it's targeted towards non-sales professionals. So, it's an ordinary, everyday, worker, individual, etc., who's got something at stake. So that's what we're working on right now, and I'm really excited about that. And we're looking at the first quarter of next year for that.
Here's a question for you: are you going to record the Audible?
Oh, absolutely.
Hell yeah.
Absolutely. Speaking of Audible, this has nothing to do with our topic or our subject, but I just heard a great Audible book, Matthew McConaughey's Green Lights.
Green Lights.
It is absolutely remarkable. I just listened to that over this past weekend. I'm going to listen to it again. So, and here's a person who is, and to hear it in his own voice, it's significantly better. So I'm definitely going to record it in my own voice.
Well, I've also downloaded that book. I've started listening to it, and one of the reviews said something along the lines of, all right. It's Matthew McConaughey coming to you live from Texas. I think I'm butchering his accent.
You did. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. He actually lived in his book. He actually lived in Australia for a year.
Did he really? Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was an exchange student. So he lived in Australia. And he says that was one of his Australia experience as one of the things that helped shape and mold him.
Well, blow me down. There you go. Fair suck of the sav. There's another book, while we're on the subject of recommending books, that references the All Blacks, called Legacy, which I would highly recommend. And it just shows you, have you had a chance to read that one, Ed?
I have not, no.
So one of the great chapters of the book, they talk about the culture within the All Blacks, and they are consistently voted the world's most successful sporting team. And it's so simple. After a test match, like an international game, after the game's finished and they're in the change rooms, before they leave, they go through and the place is left spotless. They all pick up their own rubbish and the tape from their boots and the empty bottles and all the other orange peels or whatever the hell they're eating. They do it, not the cleaners, the individual players, and the coaches involved. And it teaches them or reinforces this power of like humility. Like you are in a very fortunate position, make the most of it. And having spoken to Sir Steve Hansen, it just like trying to interview him was actually challenging because he was so damned annoyingly humble. You couldn't get him to talk about anything, but it was a real thrill. So Legacy is the book there. Green Lights is the Matthew McConaughey book, and both very, very highly recommended. What's next for Ed Tate?
Oh, wow. That is a good question. Good question. So for your audience, you and I talked about this before, but your audience doesn't know this. I have 2 children. So I have a 2-year-old daughter. Her name is Toriel. She's my heart. Okay. I also have a 34-year-old son. So okay. So, all right. Here's the short story. This is my second marriage. First marriage, that's where my son comes from. And my second marriage, I actually met my wife while I was on tour in South Africa. And because of a botched surgery in her teen years, it was believed that she couldn't have children. And her entire life, she never believed that she could have children. And then one day she's on tour with me in Chicago, and it turns out she can have children. So what's next for me is this little girl, and this change in my life has forced me to look at my future self, if you will. What is my next 5 years? What are my next 10 years? What do my next 20 years look like? So I've got some big goals. So, number one, I want to be healthy and around for my daughter, for as long as I possibly can. So as you know, I recently got double hip surgery. So I replaced both my hips in a span of 30 days because I want to be able to play with my little girl on the floor. And also, I want to be healthy. Looking at my finances, and I'm just talking strategy, not necessarily specifics. And I know you were possibly looking for specific answers, but I hope your audience can benefit from my thinking. So I want to shift over the next decade from Ed working for money to having my money work for me. So my ultimate job I want to have is just managing my investments. So, this quarter, like we've invested in Bitcoin, we have changed some of the things in terms of the stock companies that we invest in and things of that nature. I've also changed, my insurance and all these other things, if you will. So I'm playing the long game, the long haul, and I'm also being realistic as well, because there's a possibility I may not be able to, be around with my daughter in adulthood. So I'm making plans right now that for my daughter and for my wife specifically, that if I'm not around, then their lives won't be disrupted. So that's the long game I'm playing. And that's what's next for Ed. So how do I do that? So I got big goals for this year. And every year I always have, 3 big goals. One of my big goals was, the surgeries done. Check that off. Number 2 is I have a financial goal for my business, and everyone, if you run a business, you should have that. And I am 85% of plan in terms of that number. And my third goal is to be more prolific in terms of creating content. Again, just, signed a book contract. So I'm going to be writing books. I want to produce more videos. So my goal at the end of this year is have at least 50 YouTube videos posted. And then next year, I want to double that. So I want to be more prolific in terms of the content that I create, the stories I distribute, and just building my, my content empire, so to speak. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to that as well, Ed, if you're interested, the idea of mortality is something that I think about often. I have zero fear of death, but I think about how long I can live. And with the power of affirmation, right? My permanent record with my general practitioner, whenever I go in there, which is not often, usually just to get blood work, it says patient says he's going to live till 150. And so every time I go in there, she's like, oh yeah, you're going to live to 150. So I'm telling myself that, my GP's telling me that. And with modern science and some of the things that I've figured out regarding health and well-being, you watch. I'll be dishing out podcasts or whatever they're called in the future.
I believe you. Especially with the changing in technology. For example, like look at my hips. So I have 2 custom hips. That technology did not even exist 2 years ago. So as a matter of fact, this whole thing has been made laser they retrofit it, whatever, etc. And it's designed specifically for my body. It's not, these aren't like off the shelf type of parts. It's just like,
what do they scan your old hip and then just replicate it through 3D
yeah, what they
printing
did is they took X-rays. We did MRIs. We did multiple MRIs. We did 3D imaging, the whole 9 yards, and it took, what was it? It took like 8 weeks to design each replaced hip, and it was designed specifically for Ed Tate's body. To go, there's no other place where these parts could go into, but that technology didn't even exist just 2 years ago. So you make it to 150. There's things that don't exist today that will 10 years from now, 20 years from now, that we can't even imagine, that are going to help you get to that number of 150. I do believe that to be true.
One of the things that just literally came into my head as you were saying, talking about your hips, Ed, I reckon it's not outside the realms of possibility that the next decade or two that they'll be able to replace the hips that you've got now with your own bone, and to regrow the bone. And there's a lot of work to be done there, but and with what they're learning about, certainly even like, because I don't like taking a lot of supplementation, and I like trying to do it the natural way. I think understanding the body and just how amazing it is, like it's just been forged over like millions of years, really. And the power of fasting and the stem cell reproduction and the telomere lengthening, that which are basically the blueprint to how long you're going to live. It's fascinating. There's a lot of work on that. But anyway, that's a topic for another podcast. But what a great incentive, and what a wonderful miracle that was with your beautiful wife. Like having experienced. I've spoken about this publicly a lot on the podcast. My fiance and I have had 5 miscarriages and 1 ectopic over the course of 2.5 years, or nearly 3 years.
Oh my!
But you know what? Like don't. There's no pity or worry here. Like Anna and I are in a very, very good place, and it's just like what it's actually forcing us to do is go down avenues that we would have never gone down, and creating these wonderful opportunities. And so the worst case scenario, right? Worst case is we have to adopt. That's the worst case scenario. And can you imagine being the son or the daughter of me? Like, without being arrogant, you hit the jackpot there, right?
Yes. This is my jackpot look on my face. So for those of you just listening,
yes, in my own humble opinion.
But that's a beautiful thing, though. That's a beautiful thing. That to have a child. I mean, there's a child out there who, whatever reasons, whatever circumstances they find themselves in, and then to be put into like a loving environment of you and your fiance. I mean, that's just absolutely remarkable. I have a friend of mine, his name is Mark Johnson, and he did that. And he says, like, it's like he loves he loves all of his kids equally, but there's something special about Christopher, because Christopher was adopted, and Christopher was also not only was adopted, Christopher was born addicted to crack cocaine because the mother was a drug abuser. So the baby literally was hospitalized for like months and months and months. And Christopher has turned out to this great young man, highly intelligent, highly energetic, contributing, a member of society. So if that's the worst case scenario, then good on you.
Yeah, and it's really interesting learning about this shell that we are in, that we call the body, right? And learning about energy. And I'm starting to sort of drift off to what might sound a bit woo-woo or airy-fairy to some people, but I really firmly believe that the power of thought and intention, and coming from an abundance mindset has been a catalyst for the most remarkable health. And our bodies are, they talk about vibrational frequency and a lot of this other stuff that they are starting to be able to prove. People like Bruce Lipton has studied this extraordinary work on, and I'd encourage you to have a look at Dr. Bruce Lipton. Just phenomenal how what we think is possible, or what wasn't possible is now possible. And this is why I'm so excited for the future, because with my own health improvements, I'm like Benjamin Button. And for those that can't see it, he looks about 30, but he's actually way older than it's ridiculous how good he looks. So
Well,
there's absolutely no reason why you can't get to 150, which means your daughter's going to be, what's that? 70, like that's a good
exactly.
age.
Yeah, I would love to hang out. I would love to hang out with her in her retirement years. That would be absolutely amazing.
Why not?
But I do agree with you about mindset. So for example, I started off super poor, and today I live in a golf course. I live in this remarkable. I'm literally surrounded by mountains. There's a lake. If you look a little bit further down, and it's all mindset. I'm there's nothing really special about me. I'm no smarter than anybody else. But with one of my favorite books is called Enlightened Leadership, the Heart of Change. And they have this. Can you
repeat that one more time? Sorry.
It's called Enlightened Leadership, Getting to the Heart of Change.
The Light Leadership, Getting to the Heart of Change.
And it was like written in the late 1980s. And they had this one concept, and the concept is called forward and backward focus. And there's 3 laws of focus. Number 1, you can only focus on one thing at a time. Number 2, you get more of what you focus on. And number 3, the words no or don't do not work. So let's take on the 3rd law of focus. The word no or don't does not work. Have you ever said to a small child, don't spill the milk?
Mm-hmm.
What happens to that milk?
Milk spilled.
Every single time. And here's the reason why. There is no picture for the word no or don't. So when you tell someone don't do this or no, they actually see the behavior that you don't want them to do. Mm-hmm. So when you say to a small child, don't spill the milk, what does the child see? The child sees spilled milk. Guess what, mom, dad, you're responsible because you planted that picture in their brain. What you need to do is paint the picture of the behavior that you do want. Honey, hold the cup with both hands, okay? But you can only focus on one thing at a time, and you get more of what you focus on. So if you're focused on what you can't do, guess what? Your brain will produce all that evidence, yeah? And if you focus on what you can do, your brain will produce all that evidence. We can only focus on one thing at a time. We get more of what we focus on, and the words no and don't work. So those 3 laws of focus, and this concept of what they call forward focus and backward focus. So if you're focused on what you can do, if you focus on what you can't do, you can't be focused on what you can. If you're focused on problems, you're not focused on solutions, and it goes on and on and on. So this is something that I was exposed to in my early 20s and early 30s, and it has helped me throughout my life. And going back to this other topic of energy is everything, especially in public speaking. If you have 2 speakers, one is higher energy than the other, you're always going to follow the higher energetic speaker. So I agree with you completely.
Yeah, brilliant, love it. It's one extra request I have, if you're able to share with our audience, is what are some specific wording that we can use? Let's use the milk example. Mm-hmm. What's an alternate phrase that can be said that's more effective?
Or, honey, hold the cup with both hands. So here's the strategy. Here's the strategic piece. Paint the behavior of the behavior that paint the picture of the behavior that you want people to do rather than not do. So what do you want the person to do? Like if you have an employee, say for example, you have an employee who is arriving late on a consistent basis, as opposed to pounding him or her about like being late. Guess what? We get more of what we focus on. We can only focus on one thing at a time. We're focusing on being late. How about we have a conversation about arriving early? So working together, what can we do so that you can arrive here at least 10 to 15 minutes early? What are some of your ideas? What are some of your strategies? We're having a completely different conversation. Where I'm not hammering you about being late. I'm talking about how can we work together, you getting here early. That's the behavior that I want. Have more conversations about the behavior that you want rather than the conversations that you don't want. In the world, on a daily and a weekly basis, you will hear people talk about what they don't want, or basically something negative. So rarely do you hear people talk about conversations about what they do want. So that's the strategy. The strategy is paint the picture of the behavior that you do want from another person rather than what you don't want.
I absolutely adore that, Ed. One of the single greatest changes that I implemented in my own development over the last 6 years of my large transformation was removing negative self-talk and self-deprecating humor, which is really hard to do in New Zealand and Australia, where they have tall poppy syndrome and they love self-deprecating humor. And what it's taught me, I've eliminated all of that negative reinforcement out of my life, but it's also taught me to pay attention to the way other people speak about themselves. And in the right, with the right opportunity, I can say, hey, don't be so hard on yourself. Have you thought about reframing it this way? And like, you just see the relief on people's faces when they, when they talk kindly, because it's that reinforcement, so destructive in the wrong way, but so powerful in the other.
There's an expression, and it's not mine. And I honestly can't remember where I got it from, but it's helped me throughout my entire life. Never say anything about yourself you do not want to be true. Never say anything about yourself that you do not want to be true. So for example, when I first got into public speaking, I used to have this phrase I used to say, it's like, I have a terrible memory. Well, if you're going to be a professional speaker, that's not a really good thing to say, because your job pretty much depends on your memory. And I just stopped saying that. I just said, I don't want that to be true. And here's something else. I start noticing, again, forward focus, backward focus. I start noticing the times when I did remember something, and I started to acknowledge that. So for example, here's a common example. Most people say that they're terrible at remembering names. Yeah. And that may or may not be true. But when you say that statement, I'm terrible at remembering names, what happens, it reinforces that thought, and you go onto this, what I call this downward spiral. However, if you remember a person's name, guess what? It creates an upward spiral. So the thing I'm inviting people to do is, why don't you notice or catch yourself when you do something right, as opposed to just only when you do things wrong? And again, like you said, reframe it. Never say anything about yourself you don't want to be true. As a professional speaker, I can't afford to say I have a lousy memory. That's awful. That would be terrible for me. That is not true. Okay. And I've programmed myself to say I've got a memory that is better and better and better. I mean, I'm not going to do like any type of, magic tricks and memorize a phone book or something like that. However, I've got a really good memory in terms of what I do, and it helps me with my profession.
Amen, brother. That was exactly the phrase I used to say about myself. I got a terrible memory, terrible. And what I found, that certainly as part of the psychological help that I got when I sort of reached out, that most of my 0 to 18 life was gone. And what's happened now with the healing and the telling myself that I've got a better memory, those memories are coming back. And there was some memories that were repressed that were negative, child of divorce, but there was many really wonderful memories that had been repressed as well. It must have been caught up in that same loop. And my memory has gotten way better. And one other thing I'd say to people, if you want to develop your charisma even further, remember people's names. It's ridiculous.
I got a chance to meet former President Clinton once, many years ago when he was still in office. First of all, the guy is like a lot taller than I anticipated when I met him. But this guy had a remarkable memory. So it was a special event for the National Speakers Association, and we were in there for our annual convention, and it was, I'm like about 100 of us. And he only stayed there for a couple of minutes. But that guy memorized, he knew every person's name. He repeated, and it didn't matter how difficult the name may have been, he would pronounce it accurately. He would use that person's name over and over again in the conversation. He would make you feel like you're the only person in the room. And that was like, what, 30 plus years ago? And I still remember it as if it were today. That, to reinforce your point there, if you remember someone's name, guess what? That's a key to influence.
Ed Tate, you're going to be the world's #1 professional speaker. And I just
sounds like you're Matthew. That sounds like you're Matthew McConaughey.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. Sure you didn't, Bill. Sure you didn't.
Ed, didn't even go there.
We could talk about this all day, but I'm going to ask you for any concluding thoughts.
Well, hey, first of all, thank you for having me on your show. And again, I just want to reinforce some of the concepts and the ideas that we talked about here today. If you're interested in professional speaking or just asking for anything, it's all about confidence. And a great place for you to practice your confidence is Toastmasters, toastmasters.org. If you want, hang out with me, you just, edtate.com. That's my website. Send me an email, text, whatever it may be. I'm on all social media, and I'll be more than happy to follow up with you.
What's the title of your book, Ed?
It's going to be Winning High Stakes Presentations.
And so look out for that early 2022.
Yep.
All of the links will be available below. Check out his World Championship speech. It is nothing short of ridiculous. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ed Tate.